Now, item 5, the FIFA Under-20 financial underwrite. And I understand that Mr. Holdridge from Football South is here, and he's happy to come up and with the staff, with Tammy and Rebecca. So thank you, Matthew. Would you like to preface this, or do you want to go straight into questions? Or?
No, I can give some background. Thank you.
Thank you.
So in June 2013, the Dunedin City Council and New Zealand Football Incorporated entered into an agreement to host the FIFA Under-20 World Cup here in 2015. The Dunedin City Council made a financial commitment towards the Cup of $150,000 budget relieving and $160,000 non-budget relieving. On top of that, Football South committed to raise $125,000 cash. It should be noted as well that in the discussion we said there was $50,000 raised. That now stands at approximately $62,000. There was also an expectation that a tentative figure of $50,000 would be committed by the Otago Community Trust. An application was put forward for $80,000, of which $30,000 was successful, leaving a shortfall of $20,000.
Thanks, Tammy. Questions, councillors? Councillor McTavish.
Thank you. My question is possibly for Mr. Holdridge? Sorry, yeah, Mr. Holdridge. And it just pertains to the nature of the agreement. I assume that Football South has an agreement with the New Zealand Football Association as well in relation to this, or are you party to an agreement of sorts?
We don't have a specific signed agreement with New Zealand Football. That was all incorporated in the agreement that the host city signed, and our commitment was given in that respect. So, yeah.
So just in relation to, we've had the schedule of that agreement circulated to us, and it notes that there is an additional financial cash support of $125,000 that will be paid to NZF by the Football South Federation and shall not be guaranteed by the host city. There is no additional agreement between yourselves and NZFU, sorry, I don't know the acronyms, or FIFA that deals with that particular amount?
No, that's incorporated in this schedule. So that's our financial commitment. Obviously, there's commitment of our staff to support the local organising committee and the DCC. We're doing that at the moment in terms of our own time and effort, as well as activating volunteers and support for when the event comes. So, yeah.
Thank you. And just as a second question, just relating to that, we have a figure, 52,000, which feels like an immensity, but already on your guys' behalf. Is that the updated figure, or has there been further advancement on that?
Yeah, I think Tammy just mentioned that's 62,000 now. We had a trust application come in last week. That same trust has invited a further application, which is good. It is today we're really pleased. There's been a big commitment from local football clubs, not just in Dunedin, but across the federation. So there's a few clubs in Southland and Gore that have made a contribution towards that fund. So we're carrying on with that, and we've got plans in place over the next 6 months to hopefully get to the 125 as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Just taking that matter further, so the 63,000 that you're short of at the moment, albeit you've got plans in place to get that money, at the end of the day, who is the organisation that will have to front that money if if you can't raise it? Will you be able to get into a debt situation paid over other years, or will it be the host city again?
Ideally not, and that's the board of Football South over the past 7 or 8 years that I've been on the board have got a small surplus, which is about 165,000 at the end of last year. We've been working hard this year with our activities to keep that surplus, so we sort of reserve the right potentially to use that surplus if our fundraising over the next 6 months doesn't achieve that, but we don't envisage in an ideal world coming back to the council here, but I think if there's an option, then we'd obviously like to potentially try that.
A matter of record, I really do not want to encourage that, and it wasn't that response that I wanted.
I think you've done a sterling job. Actually, my questions, I think, probably are for our Chief Executive Officer. First, is that actually it's turned up on our agenda as an item saying, will we approve this funding? And does that mean there's a suggestion in any way that we could do anything other than approve a commitment we've already made? I mean, I would have thought that it would come up as to be noted that we've been called up on it, rather than any suggestion that we could do anything other than pay money that we've been obligated to pay.
No, I don't think you actually do have to pay it at this point in time. The end of the fundraising process is not met, and therefore, in a sense, what's been asked for here is an early call down so that they can meet some financial commitments to the process. It's always possible that they would do another application to Otago Community Trust, and if they raise further money, this would have to be repaid, and it gets paid to them with that understanding. So there definitely is. You could make a choice not to, and then they would just have to work out how to deal with the financial obligations they've got ahead of them.
And then they could just come back and say, 31st of December's come and gone, we haven't got it, give it to us.
At the end of the time, we have given an underwrite so that obligation is in place.
And secondly, along the same lines, is there a place in our budget that commitments like this turn up? Because usually with, sort of like not a bad debt, but a sort of a possible commitment place, because it says it's an unbudgeted item.
Yes, it is an unbudgeted item. It would be paid out, and note that it had been paid in from the end of year surplus. It would be first call on surplus, which would get through the annual plan. You would be reminded of through the annual plan process. So any end of year surplus would not be able to be used for next year's spend or to offset debt. And we do manage our books so that we have an end of year surplus. Increasingly it's a modest one rather than large, but we're quite confident there will be enough to cover this.
So we don't usually sort of track promises that we haven't yet been called up on.
Well, we certainly, I mean, when we were approached about this one, we knew that it was a promise that we'd made that we haven't yet been called up on. So in that sense, yes, we are aware of them. They come to you when we're called up on them.
Councillor Vanders.
On page 5.3 in the conclusion, it says that an authorised over-expenditure which will be met from the end of year surplus. Can someone tell me what the size of that end of year surplus is?
No, not at this point in time. We don't tend to know it until just prior to the end of the year, but we do manage the council's budgets, particularly when it comes to things like carry forwards, in order to ensure that there is a surplus.
So, given that we don't know the size of the surplus, is it possible that that may actually become negative for some unforeseen reason? And if that's the case, would that give us pause?
It's always possible, but it hasn't happened to date, and we do manage the finances to try and ensure that doesn't happen. What would you do under those circumstances, Mr. McKenzie?
You can always have the situation when you go into deficit, and effectively that would then just be over expenditure in the current year, and we'd have to look at trying to pare the savings back in the future year for that particular activity.
So you could carry forward a negative surplus, is what you're saying?
It's not common practice, and I'd say it's not good practice, but under extraordinary circumstances, you could do that.
That would be the option. Thank you.
Councillor Noon.
Thank you, Worship. I just want to refer back to the questioning from Councillor McTavish and Wilson with regards to the balance of the 125 with 63. You indicated that there were a number of clubs within the region that were likely to contribute, potentially or likely. Are there any funding applications for external money currently in front or about to be put in front of any other potential funders that will be considered before the 31st of December?
Yeah, we've got one in with Bendigo Foundation, and I don't have them to hand, somebody else is looking after them, but there's a whole host of other organisations that we're approaching for funding as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Wiley.
Mr Holdridge, how big is this event globally?
It's FIFA's second biggest football event. It's got a worldwide television audience of 170 million. There are 24 countries, including New Zealand, that will be coming to New Zealand. Obviously, there'll be national television rights in that period. I'm not sure whether that's TV1 and Sky. And in terms of forecast people into the country, I think the New Zealand LOC is about over 10,000 for that. Within Dunedin, we've got 4 football teams in the group stage and then 2 other possible teams in the round of 16. They've already booked I think 2 or 3 hotels completely, so there's direct benefit to the city as well as indirect benefit of promotion of Dunedin as a brand and a place on this national map as well as the international map as well.
Okay, I guess that leads into what my question was going to be, is how many bed nights approximately would you relate to the event?
I don't have that, but I know that they're due to be here between 7 and 10 days before the actual tournament starts. And I think each squad will have about 30 to 40 direct members of that squad. Plus you've got the media, you've got family and friends who will be travelling with them. So you're looking at, potentially future World Cup winners, future stars of the English Premier League and other big European teams, and the likes of Messi, playing in the Under-20 World Cup, Maradona, and some other global names.
And it's possible that we could have a team like Brazil, Argentina, or West Germany, or Germany.
Yeah, Germany have definitely qualified. Unfortunately, England haven't, so I'm afraid. Brazil, Argentina, and South American teams are in the qualification process. The draw is on February the 9th next year in Auckland, and the General Secretary, which is, I guess, the equivalent of the CEO, Jerome Valcke, will be in New Zealand along with a few other FIFA dignitaries to perform that draw on television.
Okay. And how's Football South going to support these events? Like, is it going to be a lot of community association with it?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been in communication with our 7,500 affiliated paying members that go from Timaru to Invercargill. It's about 4,500 in Dunedin, and that excludes the 2,500 kids that are playing futsal every week at the Edgar Centre. So we've got a whole host of activity planned for them, including in February next year at the Edgar Centre. There's a federation-wide secondary schools, primary school and intermediate school futsal tournament that the Edgar Centre's kindly given us use of, so that all monies raised there will go to this event. So there's sort of direct things where the community are coming on board.
Would you comment that right now that there's a very slow momentum being built up with this event because it is still somewhat time away, and that most of the community really haven't engaged with it fully, a bit like what happened with the Rugby World Cup? It didn't really engage until the teams got to town.
Yeah, that's probably a fair point. I think until the actual draw occurs and then the local media can start talking about the teams that are coming, that we can start activating the community and the schools and all those things into supporting the teams. You know, once we reach that point, the Cricket World Cup will be over, and then we'll be into full swing, and you'll see national as well as hopefully local advertising to promote the event to the wider market. So it's more than just football people that are going to the event. That's their desire, is to, you know, if we can, try and fill the stadium.
Okay, I'm happy to move this.
Happy to move. There's a couple more questions, so I'll just hold that. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just picking up on Councillor Wilson's anxiety around whether or not this is the last time we'll be approached for funding assistance with relation to this event. And I referred to the last sentence before the conclusion at the top of 5.3, which may fuel that an approach to the 15-16 long-term plan may eventuate. Is that an approach that has been suggested to organisers by staff, or is it an approach that has been made by event organisers to staff for that to be an option? I'm just wondering as to the background to the inclusion of that as an option in this report.
As the report notes, the fundraising target for Football South is ambitious. They hope to be able to meet that. The city is not obligated to underwrite that yet. It might get to April, mid-April, when long-term plan submissions are heard, or that's when their opportunity is to submit, and they will be in a far clearer position at that stage to know either way. We met with Football South and Community Trust, talked about their funding process, and noted that the Dunedin City Council has the motion that's included in this report about the underwrite for the 50. And we included that in the report as a flag, really, and that's all we did.
And just following on from that, and excuse my ignorance here, but is this not something that could be considered by way of the Events Attraction Fund budget?
It would possibly. It would be unusual for an event to receive the amount of support that this event has, and then also be eligible for funding through that. But plus the timing of that. I mean, the tournament's June, July, and decisions aren't made till the end of June for that fund.
Councillor Thompson.
I'm just wondering if your fundraising approaches have included to date approaching the hotels who are directly benefiting out of this investment, and if not, if it's your intention to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. We haven't approached them yet, but it's it's definitely on our list. We've had support from about 10 corporate businesses locally, which has been great, because there aren't a lot of you know, you don't buy space alongside all the FIFA global brands or anything like that. So but it's definitely on the list of people that we'll talk to.
No further questions? That's been moved by Councillor Wiley. Is there a seconder? Councillor Staines. Discussion. There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. On to item 6, the meeting schedule for 2015. Ms Graham, would you like to introduce this?
Certainly.
Rationale, etc.
As you know, we're required to adopt a schedule of meetings, and here we have proposed a slight change to the meeting schedule, in that we have a monthly council meeting at the end of each month, by and large on a Monday, but varied slightly to accommodate public holidays, with the standing committees being split over 2 months. so there's a slightly longer schedule for the standing committees. Part of the thinking is that the monthly council meetings will accommodate those things, statements of intent, annual report that are required each month. And it should help minimise the need for extraordinary councils. That said, there is still plenty of space in here to put meetings should it be required during the course of the year if there are a number of items. The plan is also to try and have reports prepared slightly more in advance and made available earlier to councillors in the lead up to the standing committees, and that will provide some time for that. It will also allow for if something is referred from one standing committee from, say, ISCOM to the following round, we have 8 weeks to prepare the material and get something back. So that's some of the thinking.
Oh, questions, councillors? Councillor Wilson.
I'm just going to check on the 26th of January. I think in the past that day hasn't always been required as a fourth day on an annual plan hearing. My frustration is that I'll be at a regional land transport meeting that day. Is that generally the day where everything is signed off in the final form for annual plan?
No, I think we tend to come back and do that. February Council.
Yeah. This is just that day, just in case we require a fourth one, I think, in January.
And because it's long-term plan, sometimes it's a bit...
Yeah. That is exactly my frustration if it's got, we're representing council on other dates that we can't.
Councillor Staines.
Thank you, Your Worship. I like the look of the schedule, but I have one concern, and that is the length of time between a standing committee meeting and the first opportunity that you would normally have, which is council, should something come up in the gap. So I've just done a quick flick through. It means there will be 6 weeks from economic development to the first council meeting at which an urgent economic development matter could be raised. That compares with 3 weeks now. And I'm just wondering what the contingency is, given that while economic development agendas and some of the other, one or two of the other agendas tend to be light, at times you get an issue that needs to be answered quickly. So I'm just wondering what the thinking is that would allow an item that's come up that needs to be dealt with in a more timely manner.
At the moment, the Finance Committee has the catch-all delegation to hear matters that are best considered by a standing committee. There'll be if this is approved, we will amend the delegation for one of the committees in the other section so that there are 2 committees that have that delegation. So either month, any month, there will be a standing committee that can hear any item.
Councillor Manners.
In recommendation 2, it talks about the community board still being in the process of considering and confirming their respective meeting schedules. Is any conflict anticipated? Is there any reason why we couldn't confirm this a little later when perhaps they had?
Pam can do this.
So does that mean we don't need recommendation 2? In fact, recommendation 2 is no longer the case then.
You could just change.
Right. Oh, you happy to make that change? Thank you.
You're happy to move when the time comes then. So I'll just take the further questions. Councillor McTavish, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. There's a subcommittee on here which, or not on here, which hasn't yet met but has been established by council, and that is the sustainability audit subcommittee. Is it the case that those dates will be set at a subsequent meeting?
It seemed to us slightly premature until that committee had met and been able to consider what its work plan was and how it wanted to meet, to put dates in without those discussions. It's hoped, again, to be able to have something more concrete on the meeting on the 15th of December, and if we don't, we'll bring it back as soon as we can in the new year and add it in.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Just for amendment, I think, just looking at page 6.5, that the Mosgiel Taieri Community Board has agreed 12 as opposed to 1.
Yep, thank you.
Right, it's been moved, Councillor Vandervis. Is there a seconder? Councillor Kell. Discussion. And that, what's been moved is what's been amended in the second part of the recommendations, and that the community boards had considered and confirmed already. All right, there being no further discussion, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, Sandy. And that's it. Oh no, there is one other minor matter. Item 7, the Forsyth Bar Stadium review.
What are we wearing?
Is Carolyn. Would you like to introduce the context? Or do you want to just go straight, or do you want to do it, Chief?
Look, by way of introduction, I'll take the report as read. You'll remember when we launched this review, we did so because it was earlier this year and we were heading towards another shortfall in the stadium budget for 2013-14. This was the third annual budget where there'd been difficulties in meeting the budget. There'd been 2 previous injections of cash. This was the third successive one, and it was clear to those of us that were trying to prepare the budget for the stadium for this financial year that there was an ongoing issue, and that the original budget proposed for the stadium, was the phrase we used at the time, was fundamentally optimistic. In addition to that, with ongoing, there was an awareness that having the same board for both the stadium building and the stadium operations was problematic, because at times one set of people were having to have 2 diametrically opposed conversations in their heads around the needs of each respective entity, and so we were clear that that was another issue. And then the role of DCHL, that had been effectively given a caretaker role but not full governance of DCHL, was also something, of DVL was also something we were aware of. So we kicked the review off, first of all, to look at the key options of, does it go or does it stay? There are sub-options of some of these options, but we've tried to distill this down into as simpler a report as we can. We also had a clear intention of wanting to make the funding for the stadium on the assumption that it goes ahead, or if you vote that it goes ahead, of course, to try and make the stadium funding more transparent. It's a very complicated and convoluted, a complex arrangement between the entities, the council, DCHL, the other companies in the DCHL group, and DVL and DVML themselves, the way the funding was set up. And we were keen to see what we could do to try and make that a little more transparent, or to try and make that as transparent as possible. So Grant and the team have worked on this. Apologies it's taken this long. It will be fair to say that the people that were working on this report full-time did get pulled off onto another major issue that you're all aware of that came up in May, and diverted their attention because it was the same group of people. But here's the report. What it does indicate is, as we would expect, that there is a shortfall in the funding going forward from here, that there's a number of measures to clarify the roles of the 2 boards that are proposed. The cost for keeping the stadium is an extra $1.8 million a year to fall on the ratepayer. The cost of not keeping the stadium, or the key option that's in here of not keeping the stadium, is another over $3 million on the ratepayer, and then some other issues are discussed as well. So taking that as read, I'll hand you over to the team that actually did the work.
Questions, councillors? Councillor Vandervis.
If we look at the very bottom of 7.3 and over the page, the financial results to date and the most recent DVML budget have proven that this can now only be achieved with the additional financial assistance from the council and ratepayers. Why does this report assume that because they've continued to fail to get budgets, that this proves that only with additional financial assistance from the council and ratepayers can they actually meet those budgets? Why, for instance, has the options of job cuts, cost cutting, management streamlining, not buying second 100 sets of television sets, why have not all of those issues been traversed in this review?
So what's happened in the course of the year, of the 9 months since the review was announced, is that DVL have in fact gone through the operational review and that is complete. So they have in fact had staffing cuts, they have in fact had budget trims, the mistaken purchases of the televisions, you can be rest assured, hasn't happened again. And they are of the opinion, and the review team did concur, that they have a very solid and tight operational budget that's in place.
Well, given that these improvements have been made and they're not going to buy any more TVs, why is it then that this report says that the most recent DVML budget has proven that they can only achieve what they want to with additional financial assistance? Because you've just confirmed that, in fact, the track record that this relies on, the assumption that they simply can't meet their budgets, you've just highlighted a whole number of changes which perhaps could allow them to meet their budgets. Why is it assumed that they won't?
So the budget that's in this report for DVL from here on for DVML's operation is in fact their new budget, so their new operating budget.
So just to clarify, it's the new DVML budget, their new request essentially for funding, that is assumed to be the baseline for whether or not they can be successful.
That's right. So like most council departments, DVML have done a budget forward for the year. The new chief executive has done this with projected income, projected expenditure. That's the budget that forms the basis for the DVML portion.
Thank you. If we go to page 7.10, option 2, close and demolish the stadium. I don't believe that close and demolish has been seriously put forward, and yet it's actually being looked at here. Why was the option of simply close the stadium when there is no major event on, when other facilities in the town could actually run those events and then not have all the ongoing costs? Why hasn't a realistic option of simply close when not required, why hasn't that been looked at?
I'll let Mr Mackenzie give you a rough outline of those costs. It's, in a sense, it's a sub-option of this option, but it was looked at.
So basically, when you look at the cost structure, there'd be very little savings would be made by if you just close it and open up for significant events. You're still going to continue to have the vast majority of their costs associated with maintaining the facility. Those costs don't go away whether you're just using one event or 30 events. I guess the issue that we've got as a city, we need to have more events at the stadium.
Surely, if we're only going to have 1 or 2 major events a year anyway that the stadium's required for, surely if we subtract all the staff costs of keeping it open every day of the year, we would have very significant savings. And if more than that, we were to subtract the costs of having a board of directors, now proposed 2 boards of directors, if we were able to get all of those staff costs removed, other than what was required for the occasional major event, surely there would have to be a dramatic reduction in the operating cost.
Can you just tell us, Mr Mackenzie, if DVML were not, if the debt were paid off and they were paying no rent, what would be their current financial position? So aside from the rent, which goes to pay off the debt, and aside from the debt, what's the net financial position of DVML with this budget from here on in?
So, with no rent at all?
Yes.
They'd make a profit of 2.5 million. That's before tax.
So there'd be a loss. if you did away with the operation, that would be a loss aside from what you might make. I mean, the difference between that and what you might make from any 1 or 2 events, if that's what you're planning to hold.
If we go now to page 7.15, where they're talking about the ownership options. In the existing option, which there's a diagram of at the bottom of 7.15, it shows a single step between Dunedin Venues Limited and the Dunedin City Council, and between Dunedin Venues Management Limited and the City Council. If you go over the page, it shows 2 steps between these organisations and the City Council. How can 2 steps removed be the more transparent that's claimed when we now have the board of DCHL sitting in the middle? How can that possibly be more transparent when it has to go through yet another group of directors?
I guess the first comment I'd say is that currently the council has an agency agreement between council and DCHL to do that governance arrangement currently. So what we're trying to do here is actually reflect what should happen longer term. It would also be following the Larson report on council group, this would be more consistent with what that report was indicating as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Kell.
Just getting my head around the cost that it's currently costing, because clearly we haven't been making allowance for the current losses it's been making. We've just been topping it up when we get a bit depressed from time to time. What I'd like to know is that we've had out there that 1.8 per year extra or whatever is what it will cost if we take on this proposal, the preferred option. Is any of that cost what actually we're currently costing? I mean, is it actually extra money, or is it just that we're acknowledging that it's costing $1 million a year in maintenance and we're acknowledging that it's making a loss? So actually a change of structure, while proposed to be more transparent and things, isn't actually costing 1.8 something million extra. It seems to me it can't be costing any extra from...
Look, whether you try and find this at the end of the year and put it in to plug a gap, or whether you transparently budget for it from the beginning of the year, this is money you're going to have to find if you want to keep operating the stadium as an ongoing concern. I was asked to put it in context with other council facilities. So under this arrangement, you would be subsidising the ratepayer would be rates subsidising DVML, the operating of the stadium, to the tune of $1.15 million a year. So that's how much you would give them next year, in the next financial year, to subsidise the day-to-day running of the stadium. Then, of course, they pay $2 million rent. So the remainder of what's being sought here is $10.5 million for debt repayment. So that is to pay off the city's stadium, and that's the bulk of the money that's being sought here. And that compares to, so that $1.15 million operational subsidy, which, as I say, allows them to pay $2 million rent, because eventually you want your stadium to be a profit-making and tax-paying concern. That compares to an operational subsidy of the libraries of $9.58 million, for Dunedin Public Art Gallery $3.8 million, Poitu Otago Settlers Museum $6.7 million, Otago Museum levy $3.8 million, Pool $4.6 million, Parks and Reserves 14.5 million, and the Botanic Garden 2.6 million. So they're the kind of amounts that go as a ratepayer subsidy for other community type facilities in the city.
I guess my question, and I'm sure the answer to it is yes, but I'm not sort of quite hearing it, is that It will not cost any more than we're currently paying, although we haven't acknowledged we're paying it, by doing this change. What we're paying right now, or what it would cost us next year if we did absolutely no changes to what's going on, knowing that we've got maintenance and knowing that we've got whatever we've got, it isn't going to cost 1.8 something million next year because of any proposed rearrangement of these deck chairs. That's what I'm really trying to get to the bottom of.
So you're correct. The only additional comment I'd say there, though, is that we have put an allowance in for renewals, which has not been there in the past. So I guess what we're trying to say is this is more realistic than we've ever had in the past. So, but it is costing slightly more.
So last year, for example, we had some surplus at the end of the year. It could potentially have been used to repay debt, but instead it went here. So now we're budgeting at the start of the year for that.
Councillor Bizet.
Mr McKenzie, on recommendation 7, means the financial strategy to modify the debt limit. How and if does this affect our credit rating with the various credit organisations like Standard & Poor's?
It would have no difference, or make no difference, because the credit rating is based across the group, and effectively all we're doing is transferring the funds within the group.
Right. And does our percentage, what effect does that have on our the ratio that we have for our maximum debt?
We would have to relook at that debt strategy that Council's currently got, which is part of the long-term plan process anyway.
Thank you.
Councillor McTavish.
Thank you, Your Worship. A couple of questions. The first just pertains to the ownership models, basically, that you look at. Firstly, thank you for the report. I think it is a good report that traverses a range of complex issues and presents them in a reasonably understandable fashion, which, and I hope a lot of our ratepayers take the time to read it, because I think it explains quite clearly the reasons why some things aren't achievable and why some things are. So thanks for that. There are a couple of areas, though, where I think that there is, if I was reading it as a ratepayer, I'd like further clarity. And one of them is around the relative merits of having council own the asset or not. Now, as I read the document, it doesn't seem that the tax status would change if council was the asset owner, but I stand to be corrected on that. And when I look at the other assets that DVML effectively leases from the council in order to make a profit, which are things like the town hall and the railway station, if I was a ratepayer, I would be asking why that model did not carry through or why this model could not be carried through to the stadium.
So I guess the issue around, that's a big question effectively, and I'll summarise it if I can, is the question I think you're asking is why do we have CCTOs?
Well, it would be a big question. But no, I don't think that is the question that I'm asking. I'm asking why, from council staff's perspective, there is considered to be such a difference between managing an asset like the town hall and managing an asset like the stadium.
Mainly due to the specific nature of the stadium asset, which is quite different from most of the other assets that council currently owns.
Because of the debt. Because of the level of debt. So I think there is a difference in tax status for a CCTO versus us.
Well, I think that would be helpful to clarify, because that's not articulated in the papers. There are two options for which the tax status is articulated as changing. Those are options 2 and 3, as far as I can tell. Option 1, which is that the council takes ownership of the asset, does not explicitly state that there would be a tax change.
This tax status does not change if it came into council.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, well, thank you. So if I understand staff correctly, the concern is that the stadium as an asset is a different beast to any other asset which our property department has background in managing, and therefore requires a specific set of expertise to manage that facility, that asset well. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I have another couple of questions, mainly around the assumptions behind the DVML balance sheet going forward. When we initially had, well, over years, we have had discussions about the corporate membership and the nature of that and the impact of that on revenue streams. There is a certain degree of reassurance offered by this report that DVML feels that it may be able to retain the current levels of revenue beyond the 16-17 year, and I'm just wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail about the reasons for that degree of certainty, which has certainly not been there before.
I wonder if we could get the Chief Executive of DVML to comment on that.
Yeah, through the Chair. The focus when I first started was revenue sustainability. That was the key focus. Membership, certainly, with terms ending next year. We've spent a lot of time with focus groups, a lot of time talking to our members. We've spent time looking at the member proposition, and we are incredibly confident that there will be a churn, there will definitely be a churn, but we're going to be introducing new product based on the back of us securing more product as we move forward that won't affect that net figure, if you like. There'll be a shift and swing arounds, but we believe we've got enough content to offer, an enhanced experience to offer, and also new product to offer that will make up that difference.
And another question along similar lines, I know that when I first saw the nature of those contracts that secure that corporate membership, I was slightly alarmed to realise that written into those contracts was the presence of certain products. Is that something that you will be bound to continue with in your membership products and agreements going forward, or will there be an ability for you to write that in such a way that there is more flexibility for the asset owner and the asset manager to respond to opportunities like artificial turf without compromising the nature of those agreements?
Yeah, it's a good question, through the Chair again. The first thing we did when I first started was audit all of our contracts. That was the first thing, to establish what's in certain contracts, there was a myriad of different deliverables. We're going to standardise that. That's one thing. So we'll carve out certain things that we don't believe we can deliver. And secondly, we'll share risk. So we won't sign 3, 5 and 10 year contracts, which in this environment is ridiculous. It'll be 1, 2, 3s, so we can share our risk around. And also it's what's market. Westpac Stadium at the moment is running through some incredible issues because their 15-year memberships, corporate boxes are all up in one go, and it's just too much risk. So we've certainly got risk. We're managing it through identifying what the issues are in contract, identifying what the needs are of the members, looking at re-tiering our product offering, and certainly taking the risk out by sharing that, by splitting those terms that we will offer on renewal.
Thank you. I guess I have another couple of specific questions, Your Worship. I guess it's better to get them all over and done with in one go. Yeah, is that right? So I'm interested in, and we don't have any of the DVML detailed financials with this, so I'm not sure, perhaps they could be supplied separately, but the percentage revenue that is generated from the stadium as an asset as opposed to activities in the other leased assets that DVML manages. I'm wondering whether there is any comment about that, because I think the Chief Executive has made the point that 2.5 million or whatever is the revenue that is generated simply from the activities of DVML. Now, if 2 million of that is generated from the Town Hall, then that is quite a different picture from 2 million of that being generated from the stadium.
I mean, I can answer that, Grant, if you like. Operating budget for Town Hall will be about 1.1 million this year. So that's our total revenue. that's coming through there. So it's significantly smaller than you would forecast it to, obviously. But I think that's low-hanging fruit, and there's opportunities. We've restructured that to grow that segment significantly.
That's helpful. Thank you. And I just wondered, in the staff's assessment of the relative merits of an artificial turf, and I understand the complex commercial nature of the agreements that we've just been talking about, and the impact that rugby has on those commercial agreements and the imperative not to compromise those commercial imperatives. However, I did wonder whether there had been a full assessment of the potential operational benefits and perhaps avoided costs that might be associated with putting an artificial turf into the stadium, where it may essentially ensure that we did not have to invest in artificial turfs for other parks-related activities elsewhere, whether or not that had been, it wasn't mentioned in the papers, and there has been talk of multiple artificial turfs and the cramping of some of our junior sport games in particular in the middle of winter, and whether or not any of that had been fed into the assessment.
So yes, we did look at artificial turf, and in particular with Terry's team. There's a couple of issues. Obviously, there's a fair bit of risk involved around what rugby's assessment of having artificial turf would be, and whether they would be in favour of it or not. So that brings a risk element for your revenue. There was also an additional cost element, and the fact that to lay it is going to cost an additional, I think the estimate was around $1 million. And then the best estimate we got around the maintenance, there was very little difference between the maintenance for artificial versus the current turf. Now, that is what we've been told. So.
No, I understand all of that, and that's really clear in the report. What wasn't clear is whether or not there had been a discussion with Parks and Reserves about the possible needs for sports fields into the future, and how those needs, or how costs associated with fulfilling those needs, might be offset or avoided by investment in an artificial turf in the stadium.
So we did not look at that.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Peake.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just two lines of questions, and my thanks also for the report. The first is around governance, and there's a recommendation that the DVL board of directors be their role be transferred to the DCHL board as an interim measure.
Correct.
Now my question is about whether that could become a permanent measure in light of, and I understand the Larson report did recommend separation, but we have a local precedent in the form of the Port Company and Chalmers Properties having been merged to previously being separated. And I'm just wondering is there an option to make this a DCHL permanent owner?
The view at this time is that it should be a separate board. It is likely to be a very small board, possibly only 3 directors. I guess what we're trying to do is adhere to the principles of what Larson said, which is one board and no joint board members between the companies. So that's what we're trying to adhere to.
It's not out of the grounds possibility.
Well, if that's the feeling of council, anything's possible.
But I think in the discussion with DCHL, they felt that it would be preferable to have a small board that owned, if you like, the stadium, governed the stadium as a building, and then reported through to them, so that they maintain that solely overview commercial tension on our behalf.
Thank you. The other line of questions is about the rugby's tenancy and use of the stadium, and could you provide an update on where tenancy or use agreements are in relation to the Highlanders Board and ORFU?
I can't, but I'm sure Terry can.
There's 3 key contracts out at the moment. The Highlanders and RFU are being reviewed now. There is commitment to get these contracts signed as a matter of urgency. There's some key elements that we're working our way through, which we'll get to. I'm hoping by Christmas we may have 2 signed contracts. There's a third element as well where we're bidding for international rugby at the moment for 2016 and 17, which is a side. Yeah. But all looking very solid, promising. I mean, at the end of the day, the players, the unions, they just they think our stadium is top of the list to present their product.
Councillor Bendis.
Mr Mackenzie, you said just now that you've been told that there's little maintenance cost difference between an artificial turf and the current mix of an artificial and grass turf. Who's given you that advice?
So that was the advice we got from the people at DVML.
So you're taking advice from the people that you might potentially want to change what they're doing.
So I saw it as taking advice from the experts in that area, as in they know more about grass and artificial turfs than I do.
These were the same people that told us they wouldn't need grow lights and that they wouldn't need extra watering systems and that they wouldn't need 3 people to keep the grass growing.
I can't comment on that, sorry.
On the last page here where it talks about turf, it says in one of the disadvantages that there would be the potential for additional operational costs, essentially because so many more people would be using it. Surely that many more people using it should actually be in the advantages rather than the disadvantages column?
Well, it depends whether you're talking about a cost or what you're referring to.
It depends whether you're an accountant or it depends whether you want some people to use the stadium. Is that what you're saying?
No, I like everyone to use the stadium, Councillor Bendis.
Okay, thank you for that. Going back to Councillor Bidrose's statement that... Chief Executive...
Mia Bidrose, actually, to you, Councillor.
Sorry, I didn't mean to give you such significant pause.
I don't think she's been demoted yet.
I don't think she could afford to. Chief Executive Bidrose said that the aim of this review is essentially to put the stadium into a profit-making and tax-paying concern. And I've just written those words down. Given that one of the major advantages of having the stadium is that its enormous losses is a tax advantage, why would we want to make it a profit-making and tax-paying concern by loading it up with an incredible number of artificial subsidies?
Like most new companies, you have a tax write-off in a loss-making period with a view to becoming a profit-making period. This company has been set up with that in mind also.
Are you saying that the tax advantages that we've had because of the losses are something which Inland Revenue wouldn't view favourably on a permanent basis?
I wouldn't imagine so, no. The intent of the stadium is that it will make a taxable profit, and the model that sets out here does in fact head it into a position of making a taxable profit over time.
Right, yes, and that was the intent, and I would like to go to quote the Carisbrook Stadium Trust May 2008 full-page advertisement regarding the intent that you've just talked about, where it says the stadium will be profitable. The funding target establishes a debt-free stadium. On this basis, the business plan for the stadium shows that it makes a profit. So what you're saying essentially is that this entirely erroneous and false prediction of the Carisbrook Stadium Trust could be made true if we subsidise it sufficiently. And I'm talking about a subsidy at this stage of a $400,000 event promotion fund, a $750,000 community access fund, a $1.8 million rates differential subsidy, a $3 million bailout fund for the trouble they got into last year, a $5.2 million subvention payment, which is also basically a subsidy, and now taking on $30 million worth of the debt as well. Why can't we call all of those things what they really are? subsidy and lump them all together. In the interest of transparency, why do we give them so many different names when in fact they are all subsidies?
So what the report intends or attempts to do is to set out all of the different ways under which the ratepayer do in fact contribute towards both the debt repayment and the running of the stadium. That's the point of the report, is to try and set them all out, lay them on a bit of paper that can be handed around for anybody that is odd enough to want to read about things like subvention payments and shareholder capital. We have tried to put it in English language. I'd have to say, as a new chief executive, it took me a fair amount of getting my head around how this model works. But the intent is, when the stadium debt is paid down to a sufficient, it's like a rental property. When the debt on the rental property, it can become a loss for some years, and when the debt is at a level that you're actually starting to take in more rent than you require to pay off your interest, it then becomes a profitable payment, and at that point you begin to pay tax on that income. This is the same process here.
Okay. Regarding the maintenance issue long term, you've looked at 10 years in this. When have you anticipated that the $16 million EFTE roof plastic cushions, when have you anticipated that that renewal will have to take place? Have you put a year on that?
Yes, I'll ask Mr Davies.
Just through the chair, the asset management plan that we've put together and forwarded to council has got that 2031-32. Following speaking with the installer last week, he was in Singapore. They've installed, and we're talking about the membrane, the plastic membrane. The plastic membrane was installed at Anaheim Zoo, I think in 1980. They've inspected that recently, and they're projecting it'll go way beyond 40, 45 years. So at the moment, the plan is 231-32 for replacement.
Right, except I note that you've quoted Anaheim Zoo. You also know about the Beijing building where it had to be replaced inside 6 years because of some pollution and other issues.
We're absolutely, the installer, we run regular checks twice a year from the installer under warranty, and that the condition is, obviously it's newish, is superb, and we can't see there any reason of being any issues within that time frame.
I've had anecdotal suggestions that we've not entirely met the requirements, the maintenance requirements, in order to maintain the guarantee for the EFTE material. Can you confirm that in fact we have met all the maintenance requirements for
Absolutely,
the EFTE?
met all requirements, it's detailed. I've got it all here if anyone wants to have a look at it later. I've got reams of documentation here, absolutely.
Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Look, I'm just seeking some clarification. The response to Councillor Calvert's question was, I just worried it had certainly confused me a little. I took it that what she was asking was, in essence, we're going to pay this money one way or the other, hence the Chief's response that whether we budget for it or not at the beginning of the year, we're going to end up paying it. But I guess the critical question is, what is the ratepayer's contribution going to be compared to what we had forecast in the next annual plan, and that is indeed $1.8 million more.
Correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Worship. My question is around the tax issue as well, and the tax efficiency that currently has existed, and I'm not suggesting for one moment we should continue making a loss in one of the companies, but a question for Mr McKenzie, when that loss is reduced, the tax efficiency is also reduced in terms of the ability to write off a profit in Aurora against a loss in DVML. Oh, sorry, DVL.
DVL, yeah. That is correct, but if you look at it overall, because you're reducing your rent by $2 million and your interest by approximately $2 million, it has very little.
At the end of the day, the bottom line still looks healthier.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question is about the future renewals requirements, and especially years 11 through 20. And I've referred to the second paragraph on 719. In years 11 through 20, however, the debt in DVL should be such that any increased renewal requirement could be managed without additional funding from the council. given that this project has been somewhat plagued by optimistic assumptions from the beginning, is it possible to get any more surety around that? Because that's potentially a hefty requirement if that isn't borne out.
And I guess it's following on from Councillor Vandervis, the main issue is around the roof and the likely timeframe that it's likely to last, and whether that's going to be renewed and in what timeframe. And unfortunately, 10 years out is quite a significant time period for this type of asset.
Councillor Bezet.
Just looking at the recommendations once again, probably a question for you, Mr Mackenzie, maybe Mr Davies, but recommendation for reviews of the rental of the stadium. Do you think this is the appropriate, given that this will go for a public consultation, do you think that's the appropriate forum to discuss the rental of the stadium? I mean, all the other issues I think do have reflect on issues that would be of some relevance or pertinence to the ratepayers, but this to me seems to be more of an operational thing and seems to be inappropriately put in there for discussion at the annual plan.
I guess it is a key decision that has to be made between the two companies, but I take your point. I'm not sure whether it needs to be consulted on.
Councillor Lord.
Yes, Grant, I won't mess around too much and go into the history of why we've got a stadium that doesn't pay, and I guess I would say that I submitted against it many years ago, but I've actually come to like it very much since, and I enjoy going there. The question I have is, have in the scope of this report, and it's not in the report, I haven't seen it anywhere, but have we considered, or is it time to consider some of our other assets and selling some other assets? I don't see that we've got any other option than to adopt this report, but are there other assets that we perhaps should be looking at selling?
I think that's not an option, not a subject for this report. We did canvass some of those issues, particularly around investment property, but what we did was we took them out of this report because they muddy the water in your decision making about the stadium. But if you want a report on asset sales outside of the one you've already made about the non-strategic property, then we can come back to you with that. But we felt that trying to put any of that in here to deal with the overall debt level and whether you want to pay that down faster than the current time frame, then that's the nature of a second report that you'd request through long-term plan.
Okay, well, instead of requesting that, can I change the question?
Well, can I just caution you that I think, Councillor, that it's a valid question, as the Chief has said, in another forum, but I think it would be unreasonable to expect the Chief Financial Officer to provide a comprehensive answer in this forum that would not run the risk of being misreported because of the brevity to which you'd have to restrict it. So, Councillor Wilson.
I'm just, Grant, just taking on a point you talked about. The whole debate has unfortunately put me in a place where I had thought I'd long left in the past because I didn't particularly enjoy this in much about the stadium debate as it happened, and reading the reports in some great length. And a question that was just posed about the renewals and the costs reminds me of what happened in the Wellington Stadium and the discussion that took place about stainless steel stairways and the like for building the stadium, and how that actually didn't eventuate. And I think we used galvanised iron instead, which was quite close to a salt air environment. And just understanding, because of what happened in my understanding of what happened in Wellington and the shortcomings of some of the building measures, which cost substantially, how certain are we that there aren't those sort of issues likely to happen at this stadium, since we didn't build with the preferred product at the start?
I can't answer that, sorry. Terry.
Yeah, through the Chair. It's a good question. Look, all we can do is monitor all of our assets regularly. We've got asset management planning that we're ticking off. We've got warranties that we're meeting all measures. You never know, but at the moment there's no surprises that we think are going to jump out at us.
Councillor McTavish.
Thanks, Your Worship. I want to follow up a line of questioning I started earlier, just to understand a little bit further the reasons behind the recommended ownership model. So from where I sit, bringing all of the way in which DVML's assets, for want of a better word, are managed into one place, i.e. the council, has a degree of transparency about that arrangement which is not present when you basically build another model for one of those assets and leave the other two under the council's asset management role. So I guess I'm curious about the extent to which the possibility of keeping the asset management of the stadium in-house was canvassed, and whether or not there was consideration given to the fact that we will have to remunerate DVL's new board, and whether or not that money could be better applied to purchasing an in-house resource within our property department that might be able to manage that asset and add value to the property management team within council, whether that was canvassed as part of your discussions. Because I think what I heard from staff earlier is that we are effectively trading off transparency of approach for expertise.
So it was not canvassed widely, is that what you were suggesting, basically? What we were looking at is the exclusive nature of the asset, and felt that at that time that expertise was where it's sitting currently, and there was limited expertise with that within council currently.
And because as outlined on page 5, the intent is that the existing model is based on the stadium eventually generating a cash flow surplus. In general, when we have companies like that, they sit under a holdings company which is there to maximise that commercial focus, which isn't generally what council departments do. The exception is the investment property portfolio, for which we're currently talking about getting an external advisory board under an earlier decision that council made. But there's always a question about if it weren't for the endowment nature of that, whether that's something that is better placed outside. Of course, once that's in a company, though, then they pay tax, and at the moment, as part of our own portfolio, they don't.
I think I understand your response, except to the extent that I'm curious as to whether you consider the commercial focus that DCHL would add to DVML's operations is as critical within DVL, where it is effectively an asset management function.
Yeah, I think in the end that with a small group of directors, the feeling amongst the staff was that was the better location with that oversight by DCHL rather than internal. But I'm happy to be critiqued for it, but that was our sense of where we were best likely to get that form of expertise, and probably more cheaply than from a staff member.
Councillor Hall.
If following on from Councillor Wilson with the external cladding, in the guarantee for the external cladding, was there not a clause in there to say that it had to be washed down at least once a year?
Through the Chair, that's correct, and we do that, yeah. It's absolutely.
Well, it never happened in the first few years.
Absolutely happening, we've only just recently done it, so absolutely meeting it.
Councillor White.
Thank you, and thank you to Grant and the team for such a good report. Trying to read all my notes now that I've scribbled all over them. On page 7.8, number 2, talks about the loan of 117.6 million. Is it possible, going into the annual plan, we can have an indication of what that would look like if it was paid over 28.5 years instead of 18.5 years?
Yes.
Okay. Just by my brief calculations, it looks like it's about a $2 million a year difference. which would obviously offset some of those costs and actually may look the stadium look like making money. Is the stadium being accurately funded to keep with requirements to be a world-class stadium? Or we just keep pulling money out of it and not investing any money to grow it?
Terry's probably...
I think the proposed CapEx budget will go a long way to helping us have surety around continued safety on what we've got. It's a relatively new venue, let's not forget, and is world class, but certainly we have to look beyond, keep looking beyond the horizon to look at new innovation, technology, providing there's an ROI on it, there's a return on investment for us.
Okay. Was there enough money from the corporate rights and naming rights left in the stadium when that money came through, or was it all taken out and put against the debt? Was there enough left in for operating?
Or you're talking about membership revenue and corporate box. That's all showing currently. That's in our operating model at the moment.
Okay. And finally, the economic impact. There's quite a bit of data here for us on 710, 723 and 724, talking about 60 million for Dunedin and 40 million plus for Otago. For example, when we had the Jehovah's Witnesses, what sort of income did that generate? Do we know yet?
Not yet. We're doing that at the moment, so we'll know that within a week or so. Yeah.
Okay. Are we seeing, from the data this year, are we seeing similar numbers to what you talked about there, the 2013 being a $537 per revenue spend per person?
And it all revolves around what content you have. In actual fact, Rod Stewart is an example. 70% of our tickets have been sold from outside of Dunedin. So when we run those numbers, we'll see probably a 10 million spend over Rod alone. Just significant numbers of new money coming into the city.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Banks.
On page 719, under rental review, it says it is normal practice for the tenant, DVML, to seek to renegotiate the level of rent with the landlord, DVL, based on DVML's ability to pay. It further says this is a normal commercial response between landlord and tenant, where there is now actual trading results on which to base these negotiations. A question really for Mr. McKenzie, and having been a landlord myself, if you had a tenant that didn't pay the rent and that rushed off with the TVs and didn't do a whole lot of other things that were expected, surely the normal response wouldn't be to reduce the rent, but to simply get a new tenant, wouldn't it?
So I think you need to look at what the basis of the rent was, which is an affordability basis, which is how it's been calculated. So on that basis that you've got 3 years worth of trading results, it's quite clearly shown that the rent is unaffordable. Therefore, the affordability basis for a rental is the rent would be significantly less than the $4 million that has been paid.
Are you convinced that it's the rent that's unaffordable, or are you convinced that it's all the extras and the indulgent spending that has been gone into by the directors that in fact is unaffordable?
Well, I'm not aware of any indulgent spending, but I am aware... A
whole bunch of new TVs that they didn't need?
I am aware that the rent is unaffordable.
Thank you.
Councillor Keller.
With the proposed corporate structure, are we to expect a level of transparency for the people of Dunedin concerning things that there's obviously a significant interest in? I do realise that there is commercial sensitivity, and especially while things are happening often. But there's two areas that I've noticed ratepayers are particularly interested in. They're interested in issues where the council is doing things for itself or for each other and things. For example, they don't consider income for the stadium to include Delta having a corporate box and paying us for it because it's just us paying each other for things. So they have an interest in those sorts of things. Does Dunedin City have any related party transactions. And they also seem to be particularly interested at the moment when we do big concerts at the stadium, whether we're actually charging people money for them or whether they're getting an advantage for Dunedin City that's worth having or whatever's going on. So in those sorts of examples, will the proposed structure be likely to have people responding by saying sort of, these are companies, these are business enterprises, mind your own business, whatever, compared with if we were more directly involved and we could ask those questions directly, or do we think that they'll answer them anyway, which you have been much more likely to do in recent times?
So the whole group of companies is subject to the same local government rules, so there should be no change. The annual accounts have to currently show related party transactions, and that would continue as well.
And the question of big things, whether we're going to get any feedback about whether it's worth, you know, whether if we have Rod Stewart, who he's paying us, we're paying him, those sorts of overall things, not in a specific sense, but in a general sense, as the people of Dunedin could know.
Well, I guess it depends on the commercial sensitive, or the nature of the transaction, how commercially sensitive it is. We currently have rules around that now, and there would be no change. So,
Councillor Hall.
I noticed that when Derek done the valuation on the stadium, I presume he done a ground valuation as well as a building valuation. The stadium ground is owned by the Dunedin City Council, 6.8 hectares. And I noticed the university has got a plaza building sitting on. Do they pay rental for the ground? So it's still in Dunedin City Council. No.
So does who pay the rental? The university?
University.
My understanding is that the subdivision of the land has not been completed yet, because the university owns the land that that building is on.
Yeah, but it doesn't show yet. It's 5 years or 4 years or something. Been a long time for a subdivision to go through. They're not paying any ground rent.
But they own the land. They have paid the city council for the land.
It just doesn't show on the.
Yes. Yep.
Any further questions? All right. Would someone like to move the recommendations? Move Councillor Staines. Seconded Councillor Noon. Discussion. Would you like to speak, Councillor Staines? Councillor McTavish.
Your Worship, I have a couple of questions about the way that the current motion is worded, which the mover and seconder may wish to consider. And that is that we don't currently operate the Forsyth Bar Stadium, so I wonder whether changing the first line to say the council agrees that the Forsyth Bar Stadium should continue to operate would be a better way of wording that first clause. And given that I think we are wanting to consult in an open and objective way, I wonder whether wording the second part of the clause such that the council, rather than that via consultation, that the council, through the draft long-term plan, consult on, and then 3 through to 7 would be changed to transferring the ownership, reviewing the rental, funding, etc. Yeah. Just for the purpose of clarity. And then I do have an additional 2 suggested parts to the motion.
All right, can we just get the mover and seconder happy with the wording change? Okay. Fire away with the additions, and we'll see if what the objective here is to see if the mover and seconder accept or are happy to have those added on, and then we don't have to do an amendment.
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
But I can remove an amendment if that's the best way forward. So I would like to see an additional, or one added in as an 8, so where the current 8 is, saying that the estimated costs of closing the stadium and associated assumptions be included in consultation documents for comparative purposes. And my reason for this is basically there are questions in the community, people want to know, and I think we will get more informed feedback if those costs are included.
Estimated costs of?
That the estimated costs of closing the stadium and associated assumptions be included in consultation documents for comparative purposes.
Right. Did you get that?
I can bring the wording up if it's agreed to.
We're just doing the last one.
Oh, yeah.
I think I've got it.
Motion now.
You happy with that, Councillor Mooney?
My only comment would be, well, firstly, I don't agree with it, but my only comment would be that within this report, I think there's adequate information for the community to consider that option. That would be my view.
Well, could it be worded that this report be included among the consultation documents?
Well, I don't think the whole report needs to be included in the consultation documents. I'm happy to move an amendment that this be included as a clause, if that's the way forward. My view is that in order to facilitate enhanced community understanding, making certain elements of this document available to the community in a more accessible way is important. So I'm happy to move.
Well, I'm not sure that you understood what I was suggesting, that your number 8 just be that this report be included.
Yeah, and no, I perfectly understood that, Your Worship. My concern is that this is quite a lengthy report. There are only elements of this which I think are relevant to the motion that I'm trying to move, and I think it would be useful to highlight those elements.
Worship, I don't have a problem with that, in that it simplifies the documentation for consultation, and all it's really doing is pulling those numbers from the report. So it's simplifying the report for the purposes of consultation. And if that assists the consultation process, then I have no problem with it.
You still have some problems?
No, if it's the relevant information that already exists in the report, I'm quite comfortable with that.
Okay. So you can accept that wording?
Yes.
I will bring the wording up. I have one final amendment that I would like to see, and that is a 9. So that DCHL be asked to keep a close watching brief on the use of artificial turfs worldwide and report back to Council as soon as they believe installation would not impact negatively on the stadium's commercial revenue streams. And I think that the reason for this is I think that there would be benefit to the community of doing this. It may avoid Council's costs going forward, but clearly we can't do that until we have a assurance that it wouldn't impact negatively on our stadium's commercial revenue streams.
The 3 options there with that particular suggestion. One is that it's included with the leave of the mover and seconder. 2, that it's an amendment. Or 3, that it just be a separate motion moved. And I'm neutral on it, but I note that it is of a different nature than the rest of the recommendations. So you can, how are the mover and seconder feeling about that particular?
I think possibly I would say it's a separate.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it separately. So,
okay, that's fine.
Point of order. Is it appropriate to be telling a particular group to keep an eye on the artificial turf when that might not be the group who ends up being charged with the responsibility of running the stadium?
Well, in the first instance, it's not a point of order, but it's a perfectly valid question. I think my understanding is that the basic context is that the recommendation is that DCHL will be
but actually, with that in mind, if we ask DVML to do that, that probably fits within their mandate as a company, and that doesn't involve the change that we're talking about consulting on, so that probably is wise.
So that can be changed in the wording of that subsequent.
I'll change it.
Okay. With the four discussed changes to the wording, it has been moved. Councillor Staines, seconded Councillor Noon. Open it up for discussion. Councillor Vance.
The stadium review is deeply disappointing to me on a number of levels. The first is that in terms of the options being looked at, the option of close was essentially dismissed by adding demolish, and I don't believe that anybody thinks that is actually a reasonable option at this point. The stadium review is essentially, as I see it, looking at the people that are involved in it, that have been responsible for it. It's a publicly funded bureaucrat's answer to what are serious business problems. The serious business problems here are that the funding is simply not available to pay for the build of the stadium in the first place, and the funding that's been allotted to the operational maintenance, the operational issues, is also vastly understated. I don't just speak for myself here, I speak for the people that voted for me. I speak for the people who actually believed what they were told when they were told repeatedly for years that it would only cost $66 a year average rate pay to run. I speak for the people who read the full-page Carisbrook Stadium Trust advertisements that said things like, unlike nearly all other council-owned facilities, it will not need annual funding support. I speak for all those people who, although they recognise that you can't change the past and that we are stuck with an enormous debt burden here, what you can change is the operational year in, year out issues that are really bleeding us dry. The original cost of the stadium and the debt that goes with it is, at the end of the day, simply a one-off, albeit an enormous one. It's the ongoing issues, the ongoing operational issues, which I believe this report largely fails to address, that are the issue here. It's how we go forward. If we were to go forward in a business-like manner, we would not, as recommendation 1 suggests, just continue to operate the Forsyth Bar Stadium essentially as it is. What we would be doing is we would be looking at drastically different operational models to try and stem the bleeding, to try and stop throwing good money after bad. In a business world, we wouldn't be replacing the DVL directors with DCHL directors and then suggesting that we get another bunch of directors as well. In the business world, we would be looking at, I believe, getting rid of all these boards of directors and simply placing the management of the stadium in the hands of one man, and we have one here, Mr. Terry Davies, who seems pretty competent, and get him to run that enterprise along the lines of perhaps the Edgar Centre, where a large number of volunteers were involved, where the stadium would be open when it had real full use and closed otherwise. In a real business world, we would not be reviewing the rental of the stadium based on what the current users are able to pay. We would be looking at the asset and asking ourselves, what actually is the real potential of this facility? And how can we actually realise that potential, rather than simply accept the excesses in spending that have characterised the stadium for more than 3 years now. It says under objective on page 7.3, it says it's been operating for more than 2 years. During this time, it has consistently been unable to meet its annual budget. It's 3 years now that it's been operating. In a business world, we would not be transferring the ownership of the stadium to a third entity we would actually be recognising how serious the stadium is in terms of loss to council, and we would be grabbing the bull by the horns, not passing it off to some other group and saying, right, this is how we're going to do things, and we're going to do things differently. The problem we have is that we keep throwing new kinds of funding at the stadium, and we keep calling them different names, disguising the fact that they're all subsidies. $400,000 event promotion fund, $750,000 community access fund, $1.8 million rates differential, $3 million bailout fund, $5.2 million subvention payments, now $30 million worth of extra debt we're going to take on. It's all subsidy. We have to front up and not pretend that it's anything else. We have to lump it all together and say, look, this is the level of subsidy that we're talking about. And then we have to change what we're doing in recognition of that. I can't vote for any of the recommendations in this paper. To me, the review should have involved people that run businesses and that have had to run businesses with their own money. It should have involved expertise from people that weren't just DVML saying, no, we can't change the turf, no, we can't change the staff levels, no, we can't change other costs. We should have had some real independent business views of how we could look at this enormous asset. Thank you for indulging me.
Councillor Wills.
I'm really sorry to have to be voting here today on this issue. I'm really sorry, but I think that the reason we're doing this is for decisions that were made a long time ago. And some of us lived them and we didn't enjoy them then either. I'm sorry that in 2007 to 2009, 2010, that this structure was set up that was illogical, didn't make any sense to anyone, and no one understood, and no one could really understand. I'm sorry that some of us here today, prior to the decisions of 2009-10 onwards, including those in the audience, were quite against the stadium and argued exactly the points that why we're here today, because the structure wasn't right and because the finances weren't right. I am sorry that Lee is finding it so hard to have been proved correct in this matter, as he was also one of those people who stood from outside arguing the case. I'm sorry that last week I actually did some housework and found some papers for my 2007 to 8-9 years on council, and on opening it found a quote from Richard Walls saying, we must make sure that we do not get into any more debt than we can afford. And I'm sorry to have read those words because it just put me in a space I didn't want to be in yet again. But I'm not sorry that 1 year ago yesterday, taking the helm of this city was Sue Bidrose. And I'd like to commend her for the changes that she's made in that year, the changes that she's brought with this review, the changes that she's made happen at DVML, that have got us into a much better, more transparent position. It still doesn't make the story any better, but at least we can plan for it going forward. And for that, I am going to support this because I think that the logic that comes out of it, albeit it may not be the story that we want to understand, at least will put us in a much better position to plan for the city going forward. I'd like to thank her and the staff generally, especially Grant, Carolyn, Sandy and Terry, for the work they've done to make this sound a heck of a lot more understandable, albeit not a less bitter pill to swallow. Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Your Worship, I noticed while Councillor Vandervis was speaking that both the clocks in the chamber have ceased to move. I draw no causal relationship whatsoever with that, but it does feel symbolic of this whole debate. I just want to comment on two things really. One is look, whilst I think there are any number of combinations and permutations that could have been put in this report, and indeed privately I've talked to staff about one that I thought should have been there and wasn't, I don't think it changes the fundamental issue. And to suggest that leaving out, if you like, closing it in between events is somehow would have been a meaningful option. Look, the stadium is, for example, in the rugby season is operating for consistently for 5 months. I'm not quite sure how you close it down in between games and still maintain it. Things like that. So I just think those are red herrings. The reality is that we have a financial difficulty, but a magnificent asset. And I really do wish to focus from here on in on the magnificent asset. I think that we can enhance that asset if we start to stand behind it as a city, recognising what it is costing us, being transparent about what it is costing us, acknowledging that amongst our community there are people who wanted to invest that money and there are people who didn't, and going back and having that debate all over again constantly does nothing for the ability of management to promote this as a fantastic asset both nationally and internationally. It does nothing for the morale of staff who constantly feel that they are having to defend their honour or their predecessors' honour or any number of other people's honour against constant attacks. What we need is to maximise the value of this facility for the people who are paying for it. And the more it's costing them, the more we need to maximise that value. And I really, really don't want to be having to respond on Morning Report about, for example, Dunedin talking about pulling down the stadium, and I know why that was there as an option. But again, it just does nothing for us as a city. We have to stand up, support now the reality of what we have and maximise its value and get the most out of it as we possibly can, and that will come when we champion it as a magnificent asset and can just accept that it has a cost like all of those other things that the CEO read out and get on with it. So let's just please do that.
Councillor Lord.
I'm going to support this too. I actually, just the only comment I'd like to make to Lee is that I don't think anyone here is actually sitting and saying this isn't a subsidy. We know we're paying for it. I know very well I'm paying for a stadium. Every time I pay my rates bill, I pay a big, big chunk. But the reality of it is that we've got two situations. We can actually sit there and say, well, close it down. We could do that. Or we could sit there and say, what are the positives that the stadium bring to the city? And I understand that some people don't see any positives in sport or rugby or whatever it is. But the reality of it is, for me, I enjoy it. I enjoy I enjoy coming to town on a rugby night. I enjoy seeing the stadium full. And if I'm going to look at other things, I mean, to be quite honest, I could sit here and argue the same points about something like the library. I've never been to the library. I never use it. But we don't have that debate. We do have the debate about the stadium. There was a point when it was voted for and it's proceeded and it's been built. And beyond that, I just think we'd look absolutely idiotic. I mean, to sit there and like Richard says, have a debate about maybe we could pull this thing down is just not anything I want to ever be involved with. I'm supportive and I'm happy to vote for this. And I'm not going to forget that when I vote for it, I'm still paying for it. And it doesn't matter how we pay for it, it's still being paid for.
Councillor Peake.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll also be supporting the recommendations and for a number of reasons. And we've heard today, for example, that we do subsidise a lot of our facilities, and to the extent of millions of dollars. The stadium, of course, is in a league of its own in terms of the financial stake we have in it. And in terms too of its potential, and Councillor Thompson's referred to that, and I would like to think of it not only as a rugby stadium, which is what it was built for originally, but as a multi-purpose, which is what many of us thought it would be. And I think we're on a pathway to achieving sort of big events there that are not sports, but are rather are appealing to other sectors of the community. I'd like to think that this is a pathway we're setting today for more certainty and more transparency over the financing of this big asset we have. And I think it's time. It's been a kind of a money go round muddle to a lot of ratepayers. No, they don't understand what's happening when companies are shifting money around and trying to sort of massage the situation. But at least I think we get more transparency with this and hopefully more certainty. I think it's time for us. You know, it might sound like we're biting the bullet here, but that is what we have to do. We really do need to take you know, a good look at this, take it by the scruff of the neck, and try and make it something that we can sustain. We want to be able to reduce the debt over a period. It looks like about a generation, but at least we're on the pathway to reducing debt and making this thing work. So I'm voting for this.
Councillor Kelly.
I think there's two things here that are being confounded. The first of them is the stadium, and clearly the people of Dunedin want us to do the best we can, not only to see whether it can get some money in, but also to use it. I think a lot of people in Dunedin, it's about the use as much as about whether lots of money's coming in. I think people enjoy using it, and I think they would enjoy more and more people using it where possible. As a separate issue, we've got a great big debt hanging around, and that debt has no relevance to the stadium at this point. We have to pay the debt back. We can't just go bankrupt like normal people would if you had a big debt and you didn't think you could manage it. We're just obliged to pay it. Completely separate issue to the stadium. We've just got this debt. It goes along with all the other debt we've got. We've got to find a way to pay it, and we have to find a way to pay it the most economically efficient way possible. So that's what's going on here. This isn't one thing, a stadium that on the whole people quite like bits of at least, and a debt that we really don't like. The debt we really don't like has no relevance to what we think about the stadium. We should separate these two things, and we're obliged to pay the debt back the best way possible. And we have the stadium, and on the whole that is good news to most people, and they'd like it used more. Debt, one place, stadium, one place, not terribly much related, we're just obliged to pay the debt back.
Councillor Wiley.
I think there's been some great comments made this afternoon, and I think it's really made us all take a look at the stadium and see what it means to us individually. But I want to read you something from the ODT this morning. It was cold, wet and windy outside on Saturday. Perfect weather for a gruesome, despicable time inside Forsyth Bar Stadium. About 1,000 people turned up to the family event, which featured a screening of Despicable Me on one of the large replay screens. DVML transformed the stadium into a giant movie theatre for the afternoon because the pitch was about to undergo annual maintenance. The time was right to let families set up beanbags and deck chairs or just sprawl out on the grassy surface with plenty of popcorn, chips, fizz and ice cream while they watched the movie. The cinema looked more like a sleepover, with many combating the cold with rugs, woolly garments and even sleeping bags. To be honest, that really sums it up for me for the stadium. It's not about sport, it's not about spending lots and lots of money, it's not about all the concerts, it's about having a facility that all the community is able to use. Last week we saw that the kindergarten celebrated their anniversary there. You know, it is a world-class venue. We have to support it, we have to embrace it, and we have to make it work. The problem I see time and time again is we're going to underfund it. Rod Stewart is going to come to town and he's going to bring $566 per person to town. That goes right across town. We've previously had councillors quoted as saying their cafe up in Middlemarch benefited from Elton John. A store in the Golden Centre benefited because of Elton John. The revenue flows across the city. It's a world-class venue, and when you talk to people from around the world that see it and have even been to it, they rave about it. The problem is we look too closely at it because it is going to be a financial burden. But let's embrace it, let's make it work. I don't personally support paying it over 18.5 years. I've already made that comment previously. I'd like to see it spread over the lifetime of the venue. But let's enjoy it, let's ensure that we've got a way to move forward on it, let's fund it appropriately, and let's leave it there for the next generation so they can enjoy it too. Thank you.
Councillor Loon.
Thank you, Worship. Look, I strongly concur with what Councillor Thompson said and Councillor Wiley has said. I think we need to focus on the positives, but I just wanted to share a little bit of the background with my colleagues, as Councillor Wilson did allude to the decision we made some time ago. One of the biggest mistakes we made was that we tried to do too much at once. We focused on a stadium, we focused on revamping a town hall, we focused on the redevelopment of Toitu, the Early Settlers Museum, and also Tahuna Stage 2. And if that's our only fault, we can look back on setting up the city for the future. And I accept Councillor Vandervis's point that we are disappointed that we're having to relook at the finances, relook at the operational costs, and that is disappointing, and because we didn't expect to be in this position when we made the decision some years ago. The other point I wanted to make also was that the operational losses have come down, and there has only been, for DVML, there has only been 2 full financial operating years, and Councillor Vandervis has alluded to 3, but remember it did open in August of 2011, and so there was a 10-month window. We didn't actually have the use of the stadium for the first 6 or 8 weeks because the Rugby World Cup was on anyway. So we've only had 2 full financial years, and the operating loss has come down significantly. Now, the current year we're in, we haven't got a A-grade all-black test, which my understanding is that's a significant contributor to the operating loss, or ideally an operating profit. So because we've got that financial year that we're in now, 14-15, and we heard from the CEO of DVML that he's going to go into negotiations with the NZRFU looking at beyond this financial year. So let's hope we can secure an A-grade test, because that, on an annual basis, for a 3-year period or whatever, if that's the greatest amount of certainty we can get, that's great. If it's a 1-year deal, that's great. But that just makes such a big contribution to the overall operating of the stadium. And I also just want to pick up on the community uses of the stadium. And I think, looking around the room, I would suggest that nearly all of us have attended functions at the stadium, and I doubt whether they're all been rugby occasions. And I know I've met Councillor Vandervis at the stadium, for example. So all of us have enjoyed the more community use that we've asked DVML to focus on. So I think we're heading in the right track. We can learn from the lessons in the past, but let's send a positive signal not only to our community, but nationally and internationally.
Councillor McTavish.
Yeah, look, I don't want to repeat what's been said, and I agree with a lot of it. But I do want to speak briefly to the reasons I promoted the amendments I did, and the reason why I'm foreshadowing another motion. And the reason for that is because it was important to me in the motions that we have today that we are reflecting the issues and the concerns and the ideas that our community have reflected back to us over the last couple of years in relation to the stadium. There was an entire review process which called for community input, which has fed into this review, and it was important to me that some of those ideas and some of those feedback were directly considered and reflected back, and I think they have been, but I wasn't sure that the original motions necessarily reflected that. So, you know, there are people that they comment on my Facebook page, they ring me, they email me, who genuinely are concerned about the impact that this is having on our finances, and genuinely wished for council to consider closure, not because they were cynical, not because they were in a position where they wanted to see the downfall of the stadium just because. They genuinely were interested in understanding the financial comparison. And I think the reasons for that are because of the lack of transparency and the lack of clarity around finances in the past. That the model that was set up, it has been said many times, and it is entirely correct, was convoluted, was lacking in transparency, was lacking in clarity, used big words, and no amount of describing that has resulted in any amount of clarity for the average Dunedin person. So I think that the important, the reason why I asked that the numbers around the possible closure are included in the consultation documents is because I think it is important for the community to understand that that work was done and to understand that that option was considered and that those costs were considered. And hopefully that will provide some clarity for those people. The second part is, we have had many people come to us and say, hey, why not consider an artificial turf in there? It would add value. It would allow the community to access and use this asset, this facility, for a great number, many more days per year than we are currently able to access and use that ground. And I agree with many members around this table. Wouldn't it be fantastic to see that facility, that asset, used for junior sport? I think that would be amazing. At the moment, that is not possible because of the nature of that turf. And that is, for me, a real hurdle to this being considered a genuine community asset in the same way that Moana Pool is, in the same way that that becomes a place where you have junior sports, you have senior sports, you have athletes, you have people going in for a recreational sit in the spa pool or whatever. Moana Pool does that because you can use that asset, you can stretch it, there is no amount of capacity in terms of, well, there is, but there are the limits around use of that facility are much higher than the limits around use of the turf as it stands. So unfortunately that is not possible at the moment. It is not possible because of the commercial arrangements that we have in place, the corporate arrangements that we have in place for the stadium, the bottom lines that we require in our revenue generation for that stadium. It is not possible for us to implement that at present. But I don't think that we should need to rule that out forever. I think that there are, the International Rugby Football Union have said they have endorsed the use of artificial turf. So I think that there are possibilities on the horizon and we need to be cognizant of those and we need to be considering those actively and at every possible opportunity into the future. I think that these, what we have in front of us in terms of recommendations are pragmatic. I think that they are based on a pragmatic assessment of a way forward, and I thank staff for that. I thank them also for the clarity with which they have presented them. I think that that is helpful, and whilst I don't think any of us sit around this table and move these motions with a great deal of delight, I think we do so in full knowledge that this is the best way forward at this time, and that staff have considered the community's feedback and distilled from that the options, the best option that we have available to us.
Before I, if there's no further speakers, before I offer the right of reply to the mover, I just comment that one of the reasons that there is confusion around this whole issue of how the stadium's funded and how it's financed is because, as just about everyone has commented, the original financial structure was very, very complicated. But the other is that when we talk about operational losses, we're actually not taking the debt into account. The big issue we're facing here is the debt. It was always there, it's ratepayer debt, and if it weren't for the fact that the debt, well, a great chunk of it was laid on DVML to service, there wouldn't be a rental, and that DVML would actually be running at an operational surplus. I think Mr. Davies said 2.5 million a year. So this is about a better way of servicing the debt. That's what this is about. And as I say, it was always the ratepayers' debt, one way or another, whether it's by foregone dividends from the companies, whether it's by subsidising, as it's been called, DVML, or whether it's direct or whatever. It's always been the ratepayers' debt. And I see this set of proposals as a way of much more clearly not only identifying how we pay or how we service that debt, but much more clearly allowing the chief to project our budgets forward and know what they're going to be, rather than this pick up the bit at the end of the year and hope that we can fit it in. So, that being the case, as Councillor Calvert pointed out, There is nothing here except perhaps for the renewals that hasn't already been identified as, and council has already been paying. And frankly, we should have had the renewals in there at the beginning as well. That was probably remiss of the original plan. So for me, this is a great improvement, and it isn't 1.8 million more than the ratepayer would have been contributing. It is pretty much the same as we would have been contributing in any case. But I think it's a much better way of doing it. So I support this. Councillor Bezet, do you have
Yeah, I'm sorry for speaking after you, but I mean, it's just a couple of words that you've mentioned there that prompts me to stand. You're quite right, and I mean, I don't know if I'm the only one that sort of feels this at all, but to me, this is just the first step. We have got to go through the annual plan process, and we'll be going through all this again. So I would plead with staff to, I know there's a report coming back for councillors to review before we get to the annual plan process, but I think it's really important how staff present to the annual plan how we go forward in this. Otherwise, we'll be going through this whole debate over again, and we'll be talking about issues that are not relevant in the least bit. And just finally, on a lighter note, I would urge the CEO to give that list of amenities, council ratepayer funded amenities that you read out so succinctly about half an hour ago to the Otago Daily Times, because I've never seen that in the Otago Daily Times in all the years that we've been debating this issue, a comprehensive comparison of other ratepayer funded amenities. Please do it.
Councillor Staines, a right of reply.
Thank you, Your Worship. Firstly, my thanks to all of those people who helped prepare this report with the Chief Executive. To me, when I read it, it put all of the elements that we all knew in one place, in a language where we could understand it. A lot of the pain that we have been suffering for the last 2 or 3 years has come from the fact that right from the start, it was clear that the financial model under which the stadium was to operate was not realistic. The crystal ball that was used at the time clearly should have been returned under warranty. It was way out. Depreciation, renewals, they were in the original budget. They were removed from that budget in order to make the equation look better, on the basis that at some point it'll be able to afford the renewals. All it did was delay the point at which we had to face that decision. And in fact, if all of these things had been known at the beginning, the clear decision should probably have been not to have proceeded with the construction of the stadium. However, as has been pointed out by many around this table, we have a stadium. And the great thing is that that stadium is recognised worldwide as one of the best stadiums in the world. It has international recognition. The teams that play in it want to play in it again. It's a playing surface that's reliable. They can play their best game on it. They're not at the risk of weather influencing the outcome of the game. Only the referees, and that's a different story. We need to be positive as a community about this facility. The past is the past, and as has been pointed out, the debt is there. If we demolish it, we will still have to pay off the debt. If we close it, we will still have to pay off the debt. So the way we, as a community, we have to look at this is how can we use this stadium to make the community a better place to live, and secondly, to increase our revenue coming into the city. And it's noted in the report that already, what I would say is a conservative estimate, there has been $60 million of revenue since the stadium opened come into the city. Now, if you say that of that, a lot was spent on people, and it would have been. People in shops, people in bars, people manning the stadium, taxi drivers, all of it flowed into our community. And if then we go to the equation that says, roughly, for every one person, so every 3 people employed in this town, another person gets employment. Take that equation And this is already having a significant impact on the people who live here and on our economy. Yes, it hurts every time we get our rates account, but there is a benefit on the other side of it, and that benefit is only going to grow over time. So I think the recommendations in here were the recommendations that probably should have been there from the beginning, so that everybody had no doubt in their mind what the actual cost to the ratepayer was going to be. And I think what we suffer now is the fact that promises were made, and we've heard the $66, not a penny more. Those promises were made with information that was far from what turned out to be reality. But we have to get over that. Embrace the stadium as one of the best stadiums in the world. Make our city proud to have that stadium, and get on and use it for the benefit of all of our ratepayers.
Okay, I'm going to put it, and I'll do them all together because I don't, unless there's a particular wish on anyone's part to separate them, but I don't think there is. I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against?
No, recorded, please.
Thank you, that's carried. Now, Councillor McTavish, did you say you want to do something else?
Pam's got it. It's as I foreshadowed, but the Chief Executive suggested that DVML might be the more appropriate body to do the reporting than DCHL. I was just thinking of the direct link to Council.
Right.
But,
before you continue, is there a seconder for this? Second. Councillor Pitt. Right. Carry on, please.
Well, I've spoken to it really. I just think that it is important that we request that the operator does keep a close watching brief on the use of artificial turfs worldwide, and get back to us if they think that it could be done without impacting negatively on the commercial revenue streams. The reason for this is because I think that we all want to see the stadium used for more community events and for more community use, and at present the turf is the constraint to that, or one of the key constraints to that. So I would commend this to Council.
Any discussion? Oh, Councillor.
Sorry, I'm going to struggle to support this. But my reasons would be that we heard from Mr Davies that he's going in to discuss possibly a 3-year contract or whatever with NZRFU. He's also going into discussions with the Highlanders, and I imagine that will be more than a 1-year deal. He's going into discussions with ORFU with regards to a contract with them as well. So with that in mind, I'm just not sure it's that wise to send a signal that we have some doubts about the playing surface and may consider an artificial turf in the future. I understand exactly what Councillor McTavish is saying, and we've all heard during the last annual plan and probably previous annual plans as well from the soccer fraternity, the hockey fraternity, about artificial turfs and the value of them and how much they can be used 24/7 and all the rest of it. But I would be concerned about the signal that this recommendation sends to the community who effectively pay the largest rental to the stadium, and I wouldn't want to see that discussion to start off on a negative note. If those people in those discussions with Mr Davies, if the first question is, are we going to actually have real grass to play on or not?
During the preparation of the review report, we did have discussions about artificial turf, and we were mindful of that concern at that point in time as well, whether we were that we had been warned that we might be sending a signal that was not wise. But actually New Zealand Rugby Football Union were perfectly happy to have that discussion, and it is something that they're keeping on their own radar as the quality of artificial turf improves, as to whether it's something that they're willing to entertain. So continuing to have that discussion doesn't do us any damage at all, and as it says, when it is something that we can do and not affect our revenue stream, then it will become something to investigate, but I don't think it damages our partners, our credibility with our partners. It doesn't appear to have to date.
Councillor Staines.
Thank you, Worship. I can support this resolution because it is tied to the commercial revenue streams. One thing that does concern me is that there are differences in the types of artificial surface. And in fact, while we've got grass, you can play soccer, you can play rugby, you can play league. There may be some other grass-based sports that you can, by the way you treat the surface. Artificial turf, on the other hand, is likely to be specialised at this stage. So we know you can't play hockey on the surface, or not international hockey on the surface at the stadium. The risk with an artificial turf may be that if that turf is designed for rugby, it might be all right for league, but it may be no use for soccer. So I think, but given that the resolution ties it to the revenue streams, then if that revenue stream looks right, then there is no risk to us.
Can I make a suggestion? I can support this, but can I make a suggestion of an addition? On the third line down, and report back to Council as soon as it believes that installation would cost effectively increase usage and would not impact negatively, because the way it's phrased, you'd put it in as soon as it didn't cost you anything, but you mightn't get any benefit out of it. The mover and seconder.
I'm comfortable with that. I was going to suggest something similar, cost effectively increase community use, but I guess either community or commercial use would be of benefit.
Well, I just thought usage,
that's fine.
cost effectively increase usage, and that puts a positive. So if the mover and seconder are happy with that, Councillor Dean.
Thank you, Bishop. I don't know whether this is relevant or not, but can I ask a question to Mr Davies? What percentage of the current turf is synthetic?
It's about 4%.
4%, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Can I answer Mr Davies' question? Mr Davies, it would be true to say that DVML are already doing this?
Through the chair, it's good practice that we're talking about technology moving forward. Our discussion with New Zealand Rugby has been that, of course, our surface is the best around, but it's good practice that we would continue to look at new technology, new surface, so it's an ongoing thing for us.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at this resolution as well as did Councillor Staines, and I thought, well, yeah, I could support that, and it was tied to the negativity of the stadium's commercial revenue stream, so that to me gave it an out, but I've always been of the view that the stadium has been looking at the best practice with regard to surfaces, and obviously artificial is one of them, but the negativity on the stadium's commercial revenue makes it more comfortable for me.
Councillor Vanders.
What hasn't been mentioned in the report, and I don't think it's been highlighted here either, is that at the moment we have a covered stadium, but not an enclosed one. And the reason we don't have an enclosed one is you need the airflow to keep a non-artificial turf going. Can you give us some idea of how many events would benefit from being able to drop the skirts and actually have an enclosed as opposed to simply a covered stadium? I know, for instance, that Elton John would have been a far better experience if it had been enclosed, and in fact that the people who did the sound for it were told that it was an enclosed stadium. They were very disappointed that it wasn't.
Just to answer, it's a hard one to answer in terms of actual quantifying what new product would come, but certainly we do have issues with our current airflow, which we need to cultivate the surface for sure.
Well, can I put the question another way? Would there be any events that would actually be disadvantaged by having an enclosed rather than a simply covered stadium?
No, it's about playing surface. If it's the surface is the debate.
Oh, any further discussion? Right to reply?
It could well be that this is something which DVML is already doing as a matter of course, but I think it is sending the right message to our community that we have heard their suggestions around this issue and endorse the work or place greater emphasis on the work that DVML may already be doing.
I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you all. Thank you. That's the end of the meeting, and thank you for a comprehensive discussion.